What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to try something different. Today, I'm going to be breaking down some of your Dynasty questions from our Discord. We're in a bit of a dead period of the offseason right now before the NFL Combine, where I'm mainly just grinding through film, grading players. And I farmed this idea out to the Discord where I basically said, fire away with some macro-based Dynasty questions. Don't ask me like team-specific stuff. I have picked 104 and 106. Who should I pick? But instead, ask some thought-provoking type of questions, stuff that I can riff on and go off the cuff on. So I got a few good ones from you guys, so I'm going to break those down. Let's get right into it. All right, so question one came from actually two of you, the Mighty Bouch and Cozy in the Discord, basically asked me a similar question, and they were curious about the pros and cons of trading this time of year, right? We're in the month of February, close to the month of March. There's not really a whole lot going on, so they were wondering, is it beneficial to get ahead of the curve and trade this time of the year, or does that come with a lot of risk kind of thing? So I actually did a video basically where I broke down how players' values fluctuate based on the time of year, called the Dynasty Fantasy Football Calendar last year. And right now, I'd like to direct your attention to a chart basically that I made that I talked about in that video. And we are in the February, March time of year. So you guys can see the legend down there. We have we have value of foundational players. These would be your elite quarterbacks, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson types. The value of this year's picks and rookies, which is obviously 2023 capital. The future picks, 2024, 2025 picks. Value of, busts and face planners, players that aren't really that good, the roster cloggers type of players. And then value of talented, productive veterans like your Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, guys like that. And basically, these players' values will change depending on the time of year that we're in. Because obviously, for example, in the case of talented veterans, they're more valuable during the season when they're actually putting production on the field than they would be this time of year when we don't really need production. Everybody's thinking about, the incoming rookie class and all that kind of stuff. So during this time of the year, it is increasingly easy to trade for talented veterans like Devontae Adams because the season becomes less and less cemented in people's minds. And if you want to buy low on players like that, you can absolutely do so. However, the con for buying players like Devontae Adams this time of year is that a lot can change affecting their value, right? They could get traded, they could get injured, their situation could change, they could retire if they're old enough, in the case of like Travis Kelce, for example. So generally, I like to wait until August or until the season's actually in progress for my competing teams to add players like this. I would rather pay, 110 cents on the dollar kind of thing in exchange for that certainty, knowing what their role is, how their outlook is going to be from like a redraft perspective come August and September. So for me, yeah, you can buy low on veterans with the intention of competing. But unless you're getting a significant discount, I'm probably going to stick to these next two assets that I'm going to talk about. And on the yellow line, you can also see that this is probably the last chance that you're going to have to buy draft picks before rookie hype season begins. Now, we're already starting to kind of see rookie hype season take shape right now. But trust me, no matter how bad or how disappointing, quote unquote, some people think the 2023 class is, the NFL Combine and the Pro Day circuits, once they actually start hitting, rookie hype season will be in full force. Even, early second round, mid second round rookie picks will be seen as highly, highly valuable type of assets. And finally, this time of year, buy low candidates oftentimes are players that aren't difference makers that people are looking to, project forward on, and it eventually gets them into trouble. And the types of players I'm talking about mainly are running backs like, Khalil Herbert or AJ Dillon, for example, who, people might be projecting they might be the week one starter of their team because Aaron Jones has an out in his contract. Obviously, we saw the other day that he actually restructured his contract and he's going to stay in Green Bay. But for example, a guy like Khalil Herbert, David Montgomery is a free agent. People are like, oh man, you might be getting the week one starting running back for the Chicago Bears. But let's say, for example, David Montgomery goes to the Miami Dolphins. He signs a 3-year deal. In free agency, he's gone. He's not in Chicago anymore. Most fantasy players will think like a fantasy player. They won't think like an NFL GM. They're going to be like, wow, wheels up. It's Khalil Herbert's season. And then suddenly in some casual leagues, he's getting traded away for first round capital, or maybe in more sharper leagues, multiple seconds or whatever the case is. The Chicago Bears are probably thinking from an NFL team perspective, not like fantasy players. Well, we couldn't pay David what he was, looking for in free agency. Miami obviously outbid us. So we'll probably just draft a running back in the NFL draft in the mid rounds, maybe sign a guy post compensatory cut day and, build out a backfield the cheaper way. Then you're stuck holding the bag because you bought Khalil Herbert for like the 202 or the 204 or something like that, thinking he'd be an RB2 for your competing dynasty team. And the Bears just drafted third round Tajay Spears. And they also signed, Alexander Madison in June when no one signed him off the scrap heap. So the point is, if you're going to buy assets at a discount during this time of year, the best types of assets to buy are either picks for 2023 or 2024, or opt to buy foundational pieces that don't have their value change a whole lot, like the top quarterbacks in Superflex, or like, elite wide receivers, or like Kyle Pitts, etc. Because this is the time of year where people get antsy to rebuild. And the reason you can get some of these foundational pieces for a discount is because people look at their teams, they go, oh man, my running backs are like James Conner, Leonard Fournette, and Alvin Kamara. I need to rebuild this team. And the easiest way, the auto default action that they go to is, I'm going to sell my elite quarterbacks. I'm going to sell my elite wide receivers, try and get a boatload of picks and rebuild this thing in the long term. But sometimes people get too impatient with that decision, right? They'll look at, Justin Herbert on their team and they'll try and sell them for whatever they can get pick value wise. So what happened to me in one of my leagues is, I'm in a league, and I'll show you the team later in the video basically, but in this league, I'm in the middle of a rebuild, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's kind of like the life cycle of where my team is at right now. And a couple days ago, I acquired a share of Bijan Robinson because the guy holding the 101 basically said in the group chat, in the sleeper chat, was like, I'm looking to shop the 101. I'm rebuilding. I'm not going to draft Bijan Robinson. So I went into his DMs, and for me, Bijan Robinson 101 is a foundational type of asset because I've already graded him. I know how good of a player he is. I took the opportunity to pounce on Bijan Robinson. My team, like I said, is in a retool, but I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I have a lot of solid foundational wide receivers like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Brandon Ayuk and Drake London, Jameson Williams at the time, Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, even Sky Moore, and some of these other guys that were my depth. Plus, I also had a stud quarterback in Justin Herbert. I traded for Kirk Cousins from this same guy who I'll talk about later in the video. Plus, I have this year's 102. So I have an ability to build out a pretty strong core of pieces. And if I add Bijan Robinson to this team, then it's going to look pretty good. So I traded Jameson Williams, the 110 this year, and the 203 this year for Bijan Robinson. Now, basically, I put the poll out on Twitter, and 90% of you guys said that I won the trade. So I went in this guy's DMs, and I basically said, what do you want for Bijan Robinson? He told me he was looking for a couple rebuilding assets, so I sent him Jameson Williams, a young wide receiver, the 110, which is a first-round pick, and the 203, which is an early second-round pick, fully expecting this guy to counter me with, Jameson Williams, the 110, in my next year's first, right? That's what I expected him to ask me for, just based on how I value Bijan Robinson, and I honestly probably would have still done that. But to my surprise, he just accepted the deal because he told me what he wanted and I gave him what he wanted. And he gave me a future first-round starter pick in Bijan Robinson for probably a fourth-round pick wide receiver, maybe a late third-round pick if you're really high on Jameson Williams. 2 mid-round picks. The 110 is probably going to be like a 6th to 8th round startup pick, as is the 203. So to answer the question, the pros of trading this time of year are getting discounts on either elite foundational pieces because teams want to tear it down and rebuild, rookie picks because people haven't done their research on the draft class yet if you're in a more casual league, or getting discounts on stable vets like Devontae Adams, who maybe have their situation in flux right now because Derek Carr just got released. The cons of trading this time of year can be that a lot can change, right? So if you're investing in players strictly based off of their situation, like a workload projected at running back, or a wide receiver moving on in free agency, the wide receiver behind them maybe getting elevated. Like last year, for example, people were buying low on Josh Palmer because Mike Williams was a free agent, and that didn't really work out. They re-signed Mike Williams, and a ton of other things could have happened. Even if Mike Williams had moved on in free agency, they might have drafted a wide receiver, whatever the case is. So don't invest in players this time of year that you think can go into new and bigger roles. Invest in players this time of year that can appreciate in value or hold their value because they're already elite assets and people are selling them for lower than they should be. So that was a loaded question. I honestly almost made the entire video just on this topic, but let's get into some of the other questions, and I'll go faster for the other 5 questions that I received. So question number 2 comes from Vorador in the Discord. He was wondering basically about the value trade-off between spending a late first-round startup pick on Deshaun Watson, Kyler Murray, etc., and going up and getting one of the top quarterbacks off the board in Superflex. So he said during the question, you guys can see he sent me like a really beefy question. He said he's not high on Deshaun Watson. He's not high on Kyler Murray. He's not high on Dak Prescott. Some of these guys that are going in this area of the draft. For me, I actually like picking these guys. I like picking at the end of the first round because you can sometimes get 2 of them at the start of your startup. So If you absolutely want to go up and get a stud like Burrow, like Herbert, like Hurts, like Mahomes, like Allen, like Lamar Jackson, I get it. But for me, I would actually just stick and pick and take two of those players if they're both available. So when it comes to trading up during the startup, especially in the first round, the first thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to deal your rookie picks, because that was actually what he asked me. Should I just trade, 111 in my 2024 first and go up and get one of these elite quarterbacks? Your rookie picks won't have any less value than they do during the startup draft. So you don't want to just willy-nilly sell your rookie picks, go up and get an elite quarterback, because even though elite quarterbacks are some of the safest assets you can get, those rookie picks will be more valuable in the future. Even if the class next year is absolute dog shit, they will still be more valuable next year than they are right now. So it's not as simple as saying, hey, take your 111, take your 2024 first, move up to the 103 and draft Jalen Hurts. Because even though that might work out for you in the long term, for me, during a startup, I would rather offer tier ups of other startup picks during the range of the draft where players start to blend together. So on the surface, the team that you're selling these picks to think they're getting a great deal, but the range of the draft where players start to blend together after the first 15 to 20 players are off the board or so, your elite quarterbacks, your Justin Jeffersons, your Jamar Chases, your Kyle Pitts, CeeDee Lambs, etc. Rounds 3 to 5 is where players start to blend together a little bit. And the same thing kind of happens after that rounds 3 to 5. There's a bit of a tier drop off. And then rounds 6 to 8, 6 to 10 or so is where the players start to blend together again. So what I would probably do in your situation is offer something like this, where you get, let's say the 104 to 106 range. You're looking for a Joe Burrow, a Jalen Hurts, a Justin Herbert. You give them your 4th round startup pick, your 111, and your 7th round startup pick. And in return, you trade down for a 5th round startup pick and 8th round startup pick. So on the surface, they look like they're getting a bunch of value in return. But for the most part, that rounds 3 to 5 range is relatively flat. And that round 6 to 10 range is relatively flat. So even if you had to give them your 6th round startup pick and you get an 8th round startup pick in return, I think that you're probably netting positive if you view those quarterbacks at the end of the first round as being lesser or inferior to the quarterback that you're going to get at 104 to 106, which I think you would definitely have a point, but I do think those quarterbacks are a little closer in my opinion. So realistically, you're trading running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends from the same tier for a better quarterback in your eyes. So hold on to your rookie picks during startup drafts. Don't, sell your 111 in a 2024 first to go up and get, Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, even though I think that's probably a worthwhile deal. I think you can probably get it done for the middle tier of quarterbacks in the first round, just using startup pick equity, not any future first round picks. So if those people in your league are willing to maneuver down, I'm sure they'll take startup pick equity and not really know how to equate the value properly. Because like I said, these guys are relatively in the same tier. Unless they recognize that, they're probably going to do the types of deals that I just outlined. So good luck in that. And also check out the video titled The Number One Strategy in Dynasty that we did last offseason, because that could probably help you during your startup as well. So question number 3 is coming from Gibby. And he basically said, how does tight end premium affect the rookie draft? Does a player like Dalton Kincaid move up higher? Does a player like Michael Mayer need to go higher? And this is a great question, because placing the tight ends in this draft class is going to be a challenge, because the tight ends are getting a lot of steam in NFL draft circles, right? I've seen mock drafts where Dalton Kincaid is going as high as 11th overall. Luke Musgrave is going as high as 15th overall. Michael Mayer is going in the first round, pretty much every mock draft that I see. Darnell Washington sometimes finds his way into the 20s as well. If these guys get round 1 draft capital in tight end premium leagues, I think you have to favor them over your favorite day 3 running back prospect, because Michael Mayer is a stud tight end prospect for me right now. In a tight end premium league, I'd be willing to select Michael Mayer as a top 9 player off the board. I would draft him once the top 4 quarterbacks are off the board: Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Will Levis, assuming all 4 of them get first round draft capital. And if any of them slide out of the first round, then I would take Michael Mayer over those players. Both Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs are off the board, assuming both of those guys go in the top 50. And my top 2 wide receivers are gone: Jordan Addison and JSN, assuming both of those guys are first round picks as well. So for me, I would actually take Michael Mayer in a tight end premium league over Quentin Johnston, because I have some question marks about QJ's ability. In a regular league, you can take QJ ahead of Michael Mayer, but even in a regular league, I still think Michael Mayer belongs to be a first round pick, 110 to 112 type of range. As far as the other tight ends in this class, Dalton Kincaid, Luke Musgrave, Darnell Washington, Tucker Kraft, some of the other dudes that are getting some steam. Like I said, these guys are getting drafted highly in NFL mock draft circles. So I know it sucks, but if you're sitting on the board at 204 or 203 or something, and Sean Tucker went in the 4th round or the 5th round of the NFL draft, and you're staring down the barrel of 5th round Sean Tucker versus top 20 pick Dalton Kincaid, you should probably go Dalton Kincaid in a tight end premium type of format. So to answer your question, I think it depends on how high the players are going, the tight ends themselves, in the actual draft. But in mock drafts, if they're any indication, I think Kincaid should probably be a top 15 to 20 pick, give or take, in Superflex rookie drafts. And guys like, Luke Musgrave and Darnell Washington and company, if they get first or if they get high second round draft capital, they should probably go in the 2-3 turn type of area in tight end premium leagues as well, maybe higher depending on exactly which team they actually go to. So the tight ends are going to be challenging to evaluate in this class. If people in your league are just going to let these tight ends fall to like the round 3, round 4 range, even though they're like first round picks or top 50 picks, then I think you should absolutely be scooping up that kind of value. And I've seen a lot of people talk about the fact that, hey, I'm not going to draft Michael Mayer at 110 because I can get Luke Musgrave in the mid third. I don't think that's how it's going to end up playing out. I think we're going to see a lot of these running backs slide in the NFL draft. A lot of these tight ends go high in the NFL draft. And if you want one of these elite tight ends, you're probably going to have to spend like a top 30 rookie pick or so to get them. So the next question here is from Crispy N. At what point during your rebuild do you push your chips in the middle is basically what he's asking. And what are some mistakes that people make when they're doing this? So I'd say the easiest way to tell when you're done rebuilding a team is objectively looking at your team and saying that you are one of the top 3 to 4 best teams in your league. And usually that kind of just happens. You don't actually have to make a decision or make any moves to have that happen. I think most of the time people push their chips into the middle and their team wasn't good enough to be a competitive team. So they decided to trade away. Maybe they had 2 more first round picks and 2 more second round picks. And they decided to trade those picks away to, quote, push their chips into the middle. And to me, that is the biggest mistake people make as far as not seeing their rebuild all the way through. And they start sacrificing value instead of just drafting a couple more players, letting their team develop. And then maybe 1 year later, their team is ready to compete for real. So I know it's tempting to say, after year 1 of a rebuild or year 2 of a rebuild, let's say you have a team like this one. This is the team that I talked about in the Bijan Robinson trade that I said the light at the end of the tunnel is available. You can see it, but it's not quite ready yet. I think theoretically, I could push my chips to the middle. If you really, really wanted to, in this league, I could grab Bijan Robinson at 101. I could trade, the 102 for Jonathan Taylor or take Jahmyr Gibbs at 102 or something like that, and then sell some of my second and third round picks for a tight end, for some running back depth, whatever I need to do to be able to push my chips into the middle to make this team compete. I could probably do that if you guys wanted to. But I'm going to be patient. I'm going to take the value where I can get it. I'm going to let my young wide receiver core develop. I'm going to grab my quarterback 1, Bryce Young, at 102. I'm going to grab Bijan Robinson at 101. And hopefully, if I hit on some of my mid-round picks, if I make some, savvy trades from now until 2024, I also have my 2024 picks that I'm going to be adding to this class. And presumably my 2024 first is going to be like mid to potentially early if I suffer some injuries and get lucky if I'm trying to rebuild this thing for 1 more year. When I'm ready to compete for real, to me, is 2024. But some people might look at this team and sell all my draft capital, get myself a tight end, get myself another quarterback, get myself some more running back depth or whatever the case is. For me, I'm probably going to see this thing through. The same guy that sold me the 101, as I mentioned, is also the guy that sold me Kirk Cousins. And the only reason I bought Kirk Cousins is because he said, he put him on the trade block and he's like, he's not going to be expensive. So I was like, okay, I'm not really ready to compete right now, but if this guy's going to sell Kirk Cousins for nothing, I'm definitely not going to say no to that. And I got Kirk Cousins for the 208 and the 301, right? To a late second round pick and an early third round pick for a starting quarterback who's probably going to be a top 15 guy in redraft this year, to me was an easy buy, even though I'm not competing. So in my situation, even though I'm not trying to push my chips into the middle and compete this year, I'm still going to take the value if people are just going to sell veterans for no reason. And to me, I can sell Kirk Cousins closer to the season for a lot more than the 208 and the 301. I might be able to get a future first at a Kirk Cousins and a second or something like that closer to the season. So to answer the question fully, you'll know you're ready to compete when your team looks like it can win with minimal or any moves on your part. So if you look at your team and you're like, I have 3 great quarterbacks or 2 really good quarterbacks and 1 solid quarterback. I have a bunch of great running backs, a bunch of great wide receivers, a bunch of great tight ends. And more importantly, the running backs that you do have are on their rookie deals or are still a lot of their prime left to go. Then I would say that your team is ready to compete. You don't want to have to completely reimagine your team right before your competitive window. You should be pretty close already. So question number 5 comes from Gibby again in the Discord. He says, when do you basically sell your superstars, right? Is it a good move to sell Patrick Mahomes? Is it a good move to sell Jalen Hurts or Joe Burrow? And what types of packages should you expect for players of that caliber? And I'm assuming he's talking about Superflex leagues because he mentioned quarterback specifically. The answer for me is you'll know if you should sell those players when someone is overpaying for them. Because if you're going to sell an absolute lock of an asset like Patrick Mahomes, an absolute lock of an asset like Joe Burrow, or an elite quarterback in a Superflex league, or maybe, Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase in regular leagues as well, I want basically 120% of what I actually think that player is worth. So if Joe Burrow is worth 4 first rounders, in my opinion, which I do think that's probably how much he's worth, I want 4 first rounders plus a young wide receiver for him. Or I want 2 of those 4 first rounders that I'm getting to be early to mid first rounders. The big mistake that I see people make all the time is that when they're tearing it down, when they decide they need to rebuild, the first thing that comes into their mind is I need to sell whatever's going to net me the most draft capital. And usually that's quarterbacks in a super flex league. So they're going to look at their team and be like, I have my running back core is Ezekiel Elliott and James Conner and all these guys that are probably not going to help them win anymore because they're past their prime. So they go to their team, they go, I have Patrick Mahomes. What can I get for Patrick Mahomes? And they'll sell him for whatever elite assets or whatever long-term rebuilding assets they can get, like the guy that I talked about did with Bijan Robinson. And that's not a terrible plan in theory, but the issue is there's not going to be many teams in your league that possess the type of war chest firepower that you're going to need to actually move that player. So if Patrick Mahomes is worth 5 first-round picks, how many teams in your league actually have 5 first-round picks to offer? And then they end up selling Patrick Mahomes for some guys 2023, 2024, and 2025 first-round picks and maybe a young wide receiver or something like that, which is probably like 60, 70, 80 cents on the dollar for a guy like Patrick Mahomes. So yes, every player has a price, and you never want to say no to the type of player, the type of package that somebody's willing to give you for an elite asset. But that should be a seldom move. That should not really happen very often in your dynasty leagues. And it should only happen if they're willing to give you, the value on top of what they're already giving you as the stud factor elite asset that they are. I'm way more likely to keep those assets on my team and rebuild around them rather than use them to kickstart my rebuild, if that makes any sense. So the last question that I'm going to talk about here, question number 6, when the wide receivers are flying off the board during a startup, when do you pivot? When do you start taking the value that's falling to you at running back, at quarterback, at tight end, whatever position it ends up being? And I would say this is why you prepare as best as you can for a startup draft. If you've played in leagues with these guys before, if you're in redraft leagues with them or whatever the case is, you want to stay as flexible as long as you possibly can so that you can make an informed decision whether you should rebuild or you should compete or retool the team a year from now. Whatever the case is, the strategy that you decide during your dynasty startup, you want to make it as late during the startup as possible so that you know how many teams in my league are rebuilding, how many teams in my league are competing, how many teams in my league don't look like they know what the fuck they're doing. They have like Kirk Cousins and, DeAndre Swift, and there's no strategy going on whatsoever. You want to basically take these teams and evaluate what their strategy is and how it relates to your strategy. So let's say Chef notices here, this is a very sharp draft room. People are taking young wide receivers left, right, and center, and it's round 5. And let's say you have 2 quarterbacks and 2 wide receivers on your roster, and you notice that only a few running backs have gone off the board, period, right? There's like 3 running backs off the board, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and Kenneth Walker. And you're on the board in round 5. You didn't intend to compete in this league, but Travis Etienne is staring you in the face. He's still on the board there, for example. By all means, pivot to a win now strategy. I will say from my perspective, though, it needs to be like 80% plus of the teams that are deploying a strategy of, rebuilding like I usually like to do in dynasty startups for me to actually pivot. If there's like no win now teams or 1 or 2 win now teams, then by all means go nuts. Evaluate the board though. If you see that the draft is playing out and how teams are being constructed, get a sheet of paper down, write down, okay, there's 9 teams in this league that are trying to rebuild. There's 2 teams in this league that are actually trying to compete. Mathematically, it makes sense for me to try and compete because I'm really only competing with 2 teams. And especially if value starts falling to you, you're probably going to be able to build a very, very good win now type of team. So if you're on the board in round 5 and you have, like I said, Travis Etienne fall to you, there's a good chance that nobody else is going to take running backs once, you and the other couple teams that are contending get into that point in the draft. So you might be able to get great value on on older wide receivers like Mike Evans and, those types of players, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupps. And also you'll also get good value on running backs. Maybe you'll get like Derrick Henry in round 9 or something like that in the startup because nobody wants to draft running backs. Again, it's all about knowing your room, knowing who you're drafting with, knowing the strategy that they are deploying. Because, if you make those decisions and if you keep track of that during the startup, you'll be able to make the best decision for your dynasty team going forward. So that is the end of the video. We actually got one more question from Meister24. He basically asked a great question, honestly. I'm going to do an entire video on it because it was such a good question, talking about trusting consensus versus your own opinion when it comes to evaluating rookies. Because I think a lot of people make this mistake all the time. They try and outsmart the market versus exploit the market. So I'm going to do an entire video on that. So Meister24, I did not ignore your question. In fact, I think your question was the best. So I'm going to do an entire video based on that question next week sometime. So definitely stay tuned for that. If you're wondering why there hasn't been any tail to tape videos yet this year, where last year I basically broke down the top I don't know, 12 to 15 prospects and basically broke down a full 20-minute video just on that player, breaking down their film, breaking down their profile, and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to do those starting in March after the NFL Combine, because last year I think I started them too early. I had them in January and February. And honestly, I didn't have enough information about the players. So the guys that I did early on, like Breece Hall, for example, my opinion changed about them after the NFL Combine when he went out and blew it up, right? He weighed in heavier than I thought he was going to weigh in. He tested a lot better than I thought he was going to test. So for me, I'm going to just hammer out 2 to 3 tail of the tapes per week after the NFL Combine leading up to the NFL Draft, because I don't want to guess heights and weights. I don't want to guess testing numbers. Plus, viewership and interest in the draft in general usually kicks up after the NFL Combine to begin with. So that is when the tail of the tape videos will be coming. Make sure to stay tuned for those. If you guys enjoyed this video at any point, leave a like down below. If you got some value from it, hit the subscribe button as well. Leave any comments, any Dynasty questions you have down below. I'll answer them to the best of my abilities. Make sure to check out the Patreon for my Dynasty rankings, for the 2023 prospect rankings, for all the databases that we have for this draft class. I'm firing player cards, evaluating these prospects. Even though I'm not doing the tail of the tapes yet, I still have, I think, 6 or 7 player cards already on Patreon. I got like 5 to 10 stashed away that I'm going to be uploading gradually as well. Almost done the quarterback and running back class. I'm done the quarterback class. I'm almost done the running back class. And then I will be getting into the wide receivers and tight ends. So patreon.com is how you can get extra content from us. Make sure to check that out if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Why you need the money?